transfer talk, Tommy. The window in Australia finally closes on Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. Not expecting too much movement, although I could be wrong, obviously. But what we want to talk about here is who's coming off contract.
Yeah.
Which means these players are available on a free transfer. Clubs can talk to them, probably are talking to them already. It's a good list too. So
It's huge, yeah.
Marin Jakalic, Valère Germain, Anthony Caceres, Hiroki Sakai,
Yep.
Daniel Arzani,
Yeah.
Juan Mata, Brian Kaltak, Noah Botic, Jake Holman, Jaden Kucharski, Adrian Segicic,
Yeah.
Jordi Valadon, Max Burgess, Costa
Huge.
Barbarouses, Callum Talbot. We're talking about some of the best players in the league
Yeah,
here.
we are.
So if you're in charge of a football department at an A-League club, who are you going for here?
Well, the interesting thing is obviously the first two, you can kind of look at it from the young players and the talents perspective and the older, already more proven players. And
Like on that, I would just say like a Sakai, it's probably not going anywhere.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
exactly.
they're just going to have that conversation later. So I don't read too much into that. What I am fascinated by is players like Segicic, Kucharski, Botic, who have huge value coming off contract.
And it's interesting because I'm sure the club is probably already having discussions with them to try and keep them, but the players probably think they might have already done enough to go overseas on a free transfer, or maybe better get a better contract at a different club. It's interesting because at times like this, from a player's perspective, you're kind of navigating that risk versus reward situation where one injury and your decision to be off contract can kind of be derailed. There's a lot of moving parts to this, but if you're the clubs in any of the situation, they should be doing everything in their power to keep these players, because you just said that the transfer fees these players will demand in future is probably going to be pretty significant.
An interesting one here, just to talk about for a second, is Daniel Arzani, who we've been speaking about quite a lot on this show, and unfortunately not always in the most glowing positive terms, especially after Popper gave him that public blast a couple of weeks ago. What are you thinking if you're Daniel Arzani at the moment, with that message from Popper still ringing in your ears, coming off contract at Melbourne Victory, where you don't, things aren't going too well, and you're not killing it like you probably like people think you should be doing? Are other clubs looking at him, or is it too much of a risk to sign a Daniel Arzani?
Well, I think that the thing that's not working in his favour is, rightly or wrongly, he's developed a reputation for having baggage and maybe having a bad work ethic, or these types of things. That's been a bit of a theme, and you just touched on it. And if you're a manager of another A-League club, for example, I think there'll be question marks around that. And that's definitely something that he has to stamp out, and I still think there's time for him to turn it around at Victory. He's been mixed so far this season. When he's been good, he's been really good, but he's obviously been in and out of the starting lineup. But I think that he's obviously been in a few clubs now, and it hasn't quite worked out for the same way it did for him at Melbourne City. So it's something that he's going to have to rectify quite quickly.
Kucharski and Segicic will probably be looking at their options very closely as well, because they keep coming off the bench for Sydney and turning games and not starting.
And they're too good to be bench players, and it's obviously when you've got such depth and quality players in the front third, it's just what happens at Sydney FC. We've seen Tilio, for example, the same thing happened to him, and he obviously left to go to Melbourne City. So if I was Sydney FC, I would obviously be doing everything I could to keep them, but at the same time, I could understand them potentially moving on.